The Dust Witch. Once upon a time, there was a land with many very wealthy countries, with fabulous capital cities, and each one with a beautiful castle. There was one with a castle of emerald. There was one with a castle of diamond. There was a country with a castle of sapphire, a castle of ruby, a castle of tanzanite, that one was a little more recent, and a castle of gold and a castle of silver. And in each of these countries there were witches of various kinds who, in accordance with the laws of the land, had a very specific power. As a witch, you were educated, raised, and trained to focus on control of one element, one physical material that you had a personal affinity for. You found out in trials throughout childhood and testing, and the witch schools would come around and their examiners would test you at various points of your childhood to see where your talent and your proclivity and your skills would lie. And then, when you reached the right age, you went off as a teenager to train as the witch in focusing on your particular talent. Now, it was very lucky that in the kingdom that had an emerald castle, they had an emerald witch who could keep the emerald castle looking spiffy and clean and green and shining. They had witches who could take care of water. They could control water, and they would use water to wash the streets and wash the castles and wash the houses and wash the buildings, and the whole kingdom would shine because it was sparkling clean from the washing from the witch who controls water. And they irrigated the crops, and everyone took baths. There were kingdoms with witches who could control fire, and they always had great banquets with abundant food because they had enough fire to cook the food. They had, she would work with a cohort witch that was a witch who was good at growing crops, like they would grow corn and wheat and squash and beans, and they always had food because the growing witch could grow the plants. In this way, each kingdom thrived in its own way with its diversity of witches. Because, if you've listened to my fairy tales in the past, you've heard a story about a witch in which we learned that everyone has a gift to bring to society. Except in the kingdom with the gold palace, there was a witch who had an affinity for controlling dust. Only dust. Now, the examiners would come to her parents' house, and the parents could already tell that the young daughter's affinity was with dust. She would make dust bunnies and dust devils and herds of dust goats and sheep, and she'd make little dust cows and dust hats and dust dresses. She could create dust, she could move and shape dust, and she could make dust go away. These were the three areas of her powers with dust. And every time the examiners would come, they'd say, well, all she does is push dust around. It's not much, it's just dust. And her parents would wait for the next year when the examiners would come back. They came every year, and they would try to get her to ripen fruit. They would try to get her to form jewelry, liquefy metal to form jewelry. They tried to get her to do anything, to make oil, scented oil, so she could make perfume and at least have a living, to move fabric. Could she move fabric? Could she shape fabric? She could be a dressmaker. Something. But she controlled dust. Now, she kept the Golden Palace very clean. And as a teenager, she went off to the academy anyway. They identified her as a dust witch, and she went off to the academy, but the teachers didn't really focus on her, and she had to do extra homework. She had to work extra hard just to make an average grade when the kids who could make gold shine, The kids who could make fire hot enough to melt gold to make jewelry, the kids who could make wind to control the weather, all of these fabulous witch talents. Kids who could control flying, could control wood, could control stone, who could bend air. No, wait, sorry, copyright infringement. They got all the teachers' attention. But the Dust Witch had to listen in on what others were being taught and then interpret it herself to make sense for her talent. And there were parts of her talent that she had to investigate, research, and develop skills for that no one was teaching her about. She had to do it herself and find out herself. Because no one thought being a Dust Witch was of any importance or value. But it was. And my story will tell you why. Long after they had graduated school, her class had gone on to work for the kingdom in various ways. The Wind Witch made sure that the clouds came at the right time to rain on the crops, and that they did not come at the wrong time so they wouldn't rain on the wedding of the king. The Fire Witch and the Gold Witch would make sure that the gold was plentiful and flowed into its molds correctly so that they could make fixtures for the golden palace and for jewelry, because this kingdom was very well known for exporting the finest gold jewelry. The Emerald Palace Kingdom would bring in gold from the Gold Kingdom because they would use it to make settings so that their Emerald Witch could conjure emeralds to put into the gold settings to make gold and emerald jewelry. Same thing with the Diamond Witch in the kingdom with the Diamond Palace, and the Sapphire Witch in the kingdom with the Sapphire Palace. The one kingdom that did not import much gold, because they didn't have much use for it, they had no jewels for it, was the Iron Kingdom. It was a regular kingdom like all the others, but with a special palace of its own, made entirely from iron. They had iron witches. It was founded by an iron witch family, and they had built the castle out of iron. And because it was iron, they were very good at making machines and farm implements and exporting these vitally important things that every kingdom paid them to import. But they were so focused on utility. And they got jealous. They got jealous of the Emerald Kingdom. And so they raised an army. And they turned their iron witch made forges and molds to turn their iron into weapons. Swords, arrows, cannons and cannonballs. And you can imagine what happened. They raised an army of their citizens who were so hungry to have what all the other kingdoms had. Beauty, elegant jewels. And since they didn't think they could make them themselves, they went and invaded the Emerald Kingdom first. And they took all the emeralds they could back to the Iron Kingdom. And then they invaded the Diamond Kingdom. And they took all the diamonds they could and brought them back to the Iron Kingdom. They did the same with the Ruby Kingdom and the Silver Kingdom, until the only kingdom left that they hadn't invaded was the Gold Kingdom. The kingdom with the Gold Palace and the Gold Witch, and where the Dust Witch lived. Now, the Gold Kingdom, they were very smart people, and they knew it was coming. And they raised an army, and they sent the army to help fight. They helped fight with the Emerald Kingdom. They helped defend the Emerald Kingdom, and the Ruby Kingdom, and the Diamond Kingdom. But the thing is, gold is a soft metal, and their weapons were no match for the iron weapons of the Iron King's soldiers. And so they came back to the Gold Kingdom after the Diamond and the Emerald and the Ruby Kingdoms fell, and they said to their king, "We're not going to be able to stop them. Our weapons are no use against them, unless we had iron we could use, but they've stopped letting us buy iron because they want to invade us and take our gold. And so word went out among all the kingdom. The king said, I need all my witches to come and help me make plans for how to defend our kingdom. We must come up with something original. And his advisors said, okay, what if the wind witch tries to blow the iron away? But the king said, no, iron is a very strong, heavy metal. All the soldiers will have to do is hold on to some iron and they won't move anywhere. Those cannons are huge and heavy. Your wind can't move them. And then the fire witch said, well, what if I heat the iron so it's red hot and they can't even touch it? And the king said, that's a good idea, but what if they throw the red hot iron at us? Then it'll burn our houses. After all, it's only the palace made out of gold. The houses are still made out of wood with straw roofs. The king went through all of the witches, and with all of their skills and talents, each one could not stand up to the iron soldiers. The dust witch heard about the king's troubles, and she said to her father and her mother, I want to go to the palace and offer my services. Her father laughed, and her mother bit her nails, and they said, all you control is dust. Dust can't possibly fight against iron. Iron is strong and hard and sharp. But the dust witch said, everyone must play a part. That's how we will win. And she went off to the palace. And when she got to the palace, the guards at the gate crossed their spears and said, who goes there? And she said, it's me, the dust witch. I've come to offer my magic to the king. And the guards laughed so hard that they dropped their spears and she walked right on in. Then the butler of the palace said, and who shall I announce is coming to visit the king? And she said, it's me, the dust witch. And he doubled over laughing so hard that he didn't even bother to take her name and introduce her. So she walked into the king's courtroom. And as she walked, in her dusty gray clothes, with little clouds of dust following behind her, all of the courtiers pointed at her and laughed. Oh, it's that dust witch. She's so young, and all she does is dust. What is she even here for? It's a golden palace. She's just going to make the palace dim. And she got up to the king, with all the courtiers laughing, and the king looked at her and said, well, I know why they're laughing. And what I don't understand is, why are you laughing? Because the dust witch was clenching her sides, doubled over in laughter. And she wiped the tears from her laughter from her cheeks, and she looked up at the king and she said, I'm laughing, Your Majesty, because all of these people are your courtiers and your nobles, and they're all so rich and so well educated. And I see over there the fire witch is laughing at me and the wind witch is laughing at me. They're all laughing at me. And yet, with all of their accomplishments, they've completely overlooked the very important rule that everyone has a gift to give. And when everyone gives their gift, we are unbeatable. They don't seem to know this. And yet, look at them with their wealth and education. Isn't it funny? And the king thought, oh, interesting. This seemingly insignificant little dust witch has wisdom. Let me ask her then, what would you do to help save the kingdom? And the dust witch said, when I came in, one of the noblemen laughing at me said, what is she going to do? All she can do is dim the castle. Dim the shiny gold of the palace. Your Majesty, that's what I would do. The first thing I would do. I will cover the palace in dust, so when the soldiers from the Iron Kingdom come, what they see, they will not desire. And so this is what she did. She went around for a whole afternoon, casting her spell and summoning dust. And the dust came in great clouds. It came from the fields, it came from the sky, it came from the deserts. She made it generate out of thin air, and it all came and settled over the golden palace, and it covered every inch. She told, I want every speck of you to cover underneath, on the sides, above, every part of the golden palace, until the golden palace looked like it was made out of dust. Well, the Iron Soldiers came from the Iron Kingdom, and they stormed through the gates of the capital city, and they filled the streets, and they were looking for the gold. Now, everyone in the Gold Kingdom had been told by the king to come and store all of their gold things inside the palace. So they were hidden underneath all the dust. And when the Iron Soldiers came, they saw that the palace was gray and browny gray dull and muck-colored and looked like dust. And so they dropped their weapons and they said, oh, well, this kingdom doesn't look like it has anything for us to take. So I guess we won't be stealing anything from here. And a great cheer went up amongst the people of the Gold Kingdom. But then the soldiers said, so, because we're here, and because we're pissed off that there's nothing for us to take home, we're going to destroy this city, this kingdom, and this palace of dust. We're going to use our iron weapons to break it apart. We're going to use them like tools to pry out the nails and to chop the wooden houses. And we're going to clang our iron together so it makes sparks, and we'll burn down the thatched roofs, and we'll burn down this dust palace. All the people of the Gold Kingdom were very afraid, because now the danger had gotten even worse. They were going to lose their homes and maybe even their lives. So the Dust Witch went out onto the balcony of the Dust Palace, and she said, Iron Soldiers, leave our kingdom, or I will bring our dust to bear on you in such great quantities that you will quake in your boots and run screaming from our kingdom. And the Iron Kingdom soldiers laughed at her, just like the nobles had. She said, what are you, a dust witch? Ha 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 ha! We've never heard of such a thing. You're puny, you're insignificant. We are iron! You can do nothing against iron! We have helmets and armor made of iron. We have spears and swords and arrows made of iron. You are just dust. You can't affect our iron. And so they made themselves into a military phalanx, and they marched towards the Dust Palace, on whose balcony the Dust Witch stood. And they lowered their weapons and pointed them at the castle, and they said, we will break apart this Dust Palace in a moment's time. Now, you may remember that the palace is really made of gold. So there's a double threat here. They're going to destroy the kingdom, but they're also going to attack the palace, which will probably uncover the dust and discover the gold. And then they'll take all the gold. The Dust Witch raised her arms, and she summoned her second power, moving dust. And she summoned all the dust from all the roads of the kingdom, all the dust from all the fields of the kingdom, all the dust from the houses and the corners and the roofs, all the unswept dust. And she told the dust to move like a hurricane at the Iron Army. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in a dust storm, or a hurricane, or a tornado, but even the smallest of particles. If you've been in a blizzard, you know this, because you've seen it with snowflakes and ice. Even the smallest particles become, at the speed of a hurricane, when it's told to move that fast, it becomes like a needle it becomes, when it hits your skin, it's as painful as a needle. Now, I hear you will say that the Iron Army had iron armor, but armor has holes small enough to breathe through, to see through. And this is what came at the Iron Army. All of these dust needles, these particles. And they slammed into the Iron Army at hurricane speed, and they clogged up the joints of the armor, so it was hard for the Iron Army to move its limbs. And they came in through the visors and the breathing holes of the helmets, and it choked the Iron soldiers. They couldn't breathe, and it got into their eyes, and they couldn't see, and they fell down, and they were leaning on the ground and on all fours and coughing and choking. And then she told the dust to bury the soldiers. And the dust started to accumulate around the soldiers. And when they saw what was happening, they were going to be buried like Pompeii under Vesuvius's ash and dust. You begin to see the power here. They said, "This is more than we can handle." And they ran away, stumbling, their armor clogged with dust. It was getting inside and filling their armor from within with dust. The Dust Witch, she didn't stop. She was relentless until the last Iron Soldier stumbled out of the gates of the kingdom. And even then, she told the dust to move across the plains outside the kingdom and chase the Iron Soldiers back to the Iron Kingdom. The citizens rejoiced. The king, once his golden palace was uncovered from the dust at her command, he sat her at the head of his banquet table. He gave her family all the gold they could want. He made her an official defending witch of the kingdom. And she received a gold medallion. And the gold medallion was especially crafted by the Gold Witch, who had learned to appreciate her colleague. And in the gold, she sculpted little fleck marks all over the surface of the otherwise shiny gold to represent flakes of dust. You know, they worked together many times to turn gold into gold dust, which is very useful in creating new forms, because dust is much more nimble and can be shaped into shapes that it's harder to make a solid metal shaped into. If you've ever worked with clay, it's sort of the same thing. Anyway, that's for another story. Our story's not yet over, because all the kings and queens from all the other kingdoms, the Ruby Kingdom, the Diamond Kingdom, the Emerald Kingdom, even the Tanzanite Kingdom, the Copper Kingdom, the Silver Kingdom, they all came to the Gold Kingdom. They had heard about the amazing victory, and they all sought out the Dust Witch. And they said, "You have done what no other of our witches nor our soldiers could possibly do. Can you go to the Iron Kingdom and get our emeralds back? Get our rubies, our diamonds, our tanzanite that was stolen from our kingdoms. Can you get it back for us?" They kidnapped our Emerald Witch. They kidnapped our Diamond Witch. Can you free them and get them back for us? And the Dust Witch said, "I'm just a Dust Witch. I'm not sure what I can do. But I do know that everyone, including me, has a gift. And when we all put our gifts together, nothing can stop us." So she went to the Iron Kingdom, confident, but with no idea what she would do. She got to the Iron Kingdom, and the guards at the gate said, "Halt! Who goes there?" And they crossed their spears. And she said, "I am the Dust Witch." And they quaked in their armor, and they moved their spears, and she went into the kingdom. She went up to the palace, and the guards at the palace crossed their iron spears, and they closed the iron gate with a big iron lock, and they said, "Halt, who goes there?" And she said, "I am the Dust Witch. I have come to see your king." And the soldiers at the gate, they trembled in their armor. They knew she could fill it with dust, and they opened the iron lock and the iron gates and moved the iron spears, and she went into the palace. And as she walked down the carpetway towards the king on his throne, on his iron throne, all of the iron courtiers, they trembled. Some of them may have laughed, but it was nervous laughter that comes when you're scared. She got before the king, and the king said, "What are you here for? What curse has brought you to our kingdom? What damage are you seeking to do?" And she looked around, and she said, "Your Majesty, I have come for 3 things. 1, I want a tour of your palace. 2, I want to make a deal that will get you to release all the diamonds, emeralds, rubies, copper, and silver that you have stolen. And 3, I want to help you." Now, when she said the first 2, when she said, "I want a tour," the courtiers looked at each other and they murmured, "What does she want a tour of our palace for? That's really weird. Is she planning to? She's going to find out our secrets. She's going to attack us." When she said that she wanted to have them release all of that they had stolen and give all back all the emeralds and rubies, then they trembled because they thought, "Oh, she's going to attack us if we don't. This is bad. We're going to be poor again." And when she said, "And I want to help you," they laughed. They thought, "A dust witch? All she can do is attack us, or, I don't know, make our houses dusty. That makes no sense. How does a dust witch help?" The king thought for a moment. He thought, "Well, we've gotten all this treasure. We took it from all these other kingdoms. None of them could do anything to keep us from taking what we wanted, except the Gold Kingdom. They beat us, and now the person that beat us for them is here. I could try and challenge her, but I'm not sure I would win. She says she wants to help us. Let's start with her first request, and we'll see where things go from there. She said there's a deal. Let's find out what it is." Iron people are very practical people. Remember, they have spent decades before they turned to making weapons, making farm implements and machines for industry to make things. They're practical people. So, he gave her a tour of the palace. And when they were down in the dungeons, she said, "These dungeons are filthy." And he said, yes, it's iron. Why should we clean it?" And when they were up in the king's own chambers, she said, "Your chambers are beautifully decorated with silk from the Silk Kingdom, and I see that you've got some of the emeralds from the Emerald Kingdom, but the walls are dark and really filthy." And he said, "Well, yes, it's iron. You don't clean iron, it's iron." And then they went out and they toured the parapets, the balconies around the towers of the Iron Kingdom and the Iron Palace. And she said, "I can see purple mountains in the distance. I can see the ocean. The view is spectacular. Your palace is so cleverly built. But it's filthy and dark." And he said, "Yeah, it's iron. Why should we clean iron? Water witches can't do anything. It'll rust." So, the Dust Witch said to the king, "Here's the deal. Will you agree to give back the emeralds, the rubies, the sapphires, the tanzanite, the copper, the silver, and promise never to attack us again if I make your palace shine?" And the Iron King said, "What?" And the courtiers listening laughed. "Iron doesn't shine. It's iron. It's either black and rough or it's rusty. You ever owned a skillet made of iron?" And she said, "Never doubt my witch powers. I had to work twice as hard in witch school. more than the fire witches, more than the wind witches, more than the water witches. I had to work twice as hard to understand and become master of my craft. I can make your palace shine." And the king said, "Well, I can't lose either way. Either I keep the emeralds and the rubies and the diamonds, or my palace," she says, "will shine, and we will have the glory that we've missed, that all of our neighbors have had. Let her try. Either way, I win." So she asked all of the courtiers and the king to leave the Iron Palace for 2 days. So they all went to their country estates in the Iron Kingdom, and they looked through their telescopes at the palace to see how and if she could make it shine. And what the witch did was, day 1, she told all the dust. She went back through the palace because she knew where everything was now, and she told all the dust to wait outside. And all the dust left the iron corners and the iron rafters and behind the iron throne, and it went outside and it waited on the ground. Then, at the end of day 1, she went up to the king's chambers and she slept in the king's bed and had the best sleep of her entire life so far. Cheeky. The next day she got up and she went outside the castle. And she said to the dust, "I want you to dance for as long and as hard as you can across every surface of the Iron Palace." And she created even more dust. And she summoned dust from all the surrounding kingdoms. And all the dust of the land came to the Iron Palace. And she said, "Dance! Move across the surface of the Iron Palace. Dance all day! Dance all night! Do not rest until the sun comes up tomorrow morning." In the middle of the night, she was taking a nap. She woke up. She said, Okay. All of the grown-up dust, now take a rest. It is time for the baby dust to dance." And all the larger pieces of dust fell to the ground and rested. And all of the tiny particles, the smallest particles, danced across the surfaces of the Iron Palace. Now, if you've done any metallurgy, or if you've made jewelry, you'll know what happened. When the sun came up the next morning, the dust witch asked all of the dust to please go and rest on a mountainside. And it made the mountain 30 feet higher than it had been. But there was no dust in the Iron Kingdom. And when the Iron King and all of the Iron Nobles came back to the palace shone so brightly that the sun, glinting off the Iron Palace, caused a few fires in the thatched roofs around town, and the fire departments had to come, and the water witch had to help put them out. Because when you polish iron, it shines. And the larger dust particles, they had scrubbed the surface and gotten it so it wasn't rough, so that it was perfectly smooth. And then, in the middle of the night, when she told all the baby dust particles to dance, the small particles became an even finer polishing until they made a glass-smooth surface all over the iron of the Iron Palace, and it shone, it gleamed with a kind of dark silver. For those of you who know, a hematite shine. The king and the iron courtiers were stunned. And she said, "If you will give back these gems, I will leave your palace shining. If you don't, I'm going to have to call the dust back, and I will cover your palace. But if you give them back, I will come every 3 months to visit your kingdom, and I will clean all the dust out of your palace and your homes, and I will make sure that it shines." The Dust King and his Dust Nobles had a quick little parliament in the shimmering throne room. And they said, "You know what? This is good. We will finally achieve the status and the glory and the fabulousness that all the other kingdoms have had. They will respect our iron. And if we give these back, we can use diplomacy and maybe they'll forgive us. And we can go back to trading our implements, because they're not buying from us if we're stealing from them. Yeah, we can have trade again, and then we can get money. And you know what? Maybe we can get the Dust Witch to use iron particles of dust to magnetize our iron, and we can have magnets." So they agreed. And the court scribe of the Iron Court drew up the agreement. And the wagons, the iron wagons, now the Iron Kingdom had the strongest horses in all the land, because they had to pull iron. These strong horses with the iron wagons took all the emeralds back to the Emerald Kingdom, all the diamonds back to the Diamond Kingdom, all the copper back to the Copper Kingdom. And do you know what the people of the Iron Kingdom said when they left? They were like, "We don't need your weird green stones. We don't need your weird red stones. We've got shiny iron. We've always been about iron, and now that we know that it shines, we are so proud of our iron." Ironic, isn't it? The Dust Witch signed the agreement on behalf of her king, the Gold King, and on behalf of all the other kingdoms. And she and all the emissaries from all the other kingdoms that had come to oversee the deal, they all went back to the Gold Kingdom. And that night there was feasting in the Gold Kingdom and feasting in the Iron Kingdom off of their brand new shiny hematite plates and their shiny new banquet hall that had been a dull and dingy banquet hall in their palace. They didn't tear anything down to build a new dining hall. It's always best to take what you've got and make it good, make it shine. There was feasting in the Emerald Kingdom, there was feasting in the Ruby Kingdom, and everyone went back to making what they made best and trading it with their neighbors and living in harmony. When you love what you do and you love who you are, you live in harmony with everyone. It's when you don't love who you are and you try to make up for that loss by taking from other people that you live in disharmony and you create suffering and misery. But if you're lucky, maybe a Dust Witch will come along and teach you how fantastic you actually are. The end.